Welcome to the second part on Sinai today. Now, if you're a Christian or you're Jewish, you definitely know what happened at Sinai. And it's recorded in the Christian Bible in the book of Exodus, and I believe the Ten Commandments are in Deuteronomy also. So last week we talked about, I took a group and we climbed Sinai. And of course, an adventure like that is more than you can say or put in to words. But today we're going to be looking at it some more. And I went through my notebook and just picked out a very few pictures that we'll show you today. So this is what it looks like if you were going to get to climb Sinai. So as I speak and tell different things, you'll see different pictures that my group took while we were there. Okay, I told you that we left Israel and we drove down through the Sinai Peninsula. Well, we spent the last night before going into the Sinai Peninsula at the place where, the name of it is Eilat. And this is where many people believe that Moses crossed over the Red Sea. And so then the next morning we got a new bus with a new driver that picked us up because we were now in Egypt. And we rode in a little bitty bus that was so hot, I can't describe how hot it was to you. And I guess it took us like 3 or 4 hours, I think, to get there. Now, it takes a lot to frighten me because I just don't frighten very easily, and you give me an adventure, and the wilder it gets, the more I like it. So when we arrived at what you might call a hotel, it was little cabins that were separated from one another. Oh my goodness, these men that came to get our luggage and worked at the hotel. If there was any place else to have spent the night, we definitely would have, but there wasn't, so we had to go in. And I won't take my time describing these men, but it was like nothing I had ever seen before. Of course, nothing lives in that desert except the Bedouins, true Bedouins. And this was where Moses was supposed to have, if this is the true place of Sinai, this is where Moses fled from Egypt and lived for 40 years tending the sheep there of Jethro, his father-in-law. One of the things that before we get into the Bible today about this area, one of the things that was so interesting to me, and I have pictures of this, but I couldn't find them. At that time, Anwar Sadat had been assassinated. Sadat went back home. He went to drive to his office one morning, and he was assassinated because of his making an agreement with Israel. So Sadat had a place, a home, here at Sinai. And you had to climb a mountain. It kind of looked like a spaceship up there. It was a big, big flat building, and that's where we took our meals. And that was, to me, the most fascinating thing. Of course, Sadat was dead at that time, so they turned it into, a restaurant and a meeting place for the people who came and stayed in this hotel. It was the only place to stay there. So anyway, we got there, and the next morning at 1:30 we met and to get on camels and to go up as far as the camels could climb. And then you left the camels, it's about halfway up the mountain, and then you had to walk the rest of the way. It took us, I'm thinking, approximately 4 hours to climb that particular summit that they say is where God appeared to Moses and gave him the commandments. So it was an awesome experience. I wouldn't take anything for it. So today we're going to look at one scripture before we get started. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it as we go along. At the base of this mountain, which is they call it the Mountain of Moses, is a monastery, and it's called St. Catherine's. And it is at the foot of this, when you come down from your climb, if you're not half dead like we were, you get to go through St. Catherine's. And I'll tell you more about St. Catherine's as we go along, but it's a very, very famous church because in the time when there were so many wars in Israel, this is way down, hidden, this monastery. It's a monastery, not a church, but and it has chapels in it. It even has a little, what do you call it, the Arab mosque there also. So when all these wars came against Israel, because of the location of St. Catherine's, none of the books were stolen or none of the building was torn down. So the two oldest copies of the Bible that we have, one of them came from St. Catherine's. We'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, let's go now to Exodus. And we're going to read some things that I know you know the Bible probably, but I always love to read from the Bible because even as many times as I read these stories, I read it again and think, wow, that is some story. So we're going to Exodus 24. And we're going to go to verse 9. And this is the fifth ascent. This is the fifth time now that Moses has gone up into this mountain. And so in verse 9 it says, "And then Moses and Aaron, Adab, Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel went up the mountain. And they saw the God of Israel, and there was under his feet, as it were, a paved work of a sapphire stone." So you might say that they saw God on a platform of sapphire. Now, you know, we're told in the Bible that there are different layers in heaven that are different gemstones. So the Bible tells us that these people saw God when they got up there in the mountain, and underneath God's feet, it says it was like a paved work. In other words, it was clear like glass. It was like somebody had come and chiseled out a sapphire. Now, you ladies, some of you might have on a sapphire ring today. You know, it's one of the most beautiful blues that there is. So God appeared in that mountain with his feet on a paved work of sapphire stone, and as it were the body of heaven in his cleanness, and upon the clearness, and as it were the body of heaven in his clearness. I can only imagine what that might mean. Upon the nobles of the children of Israel, he did not lay his hand. That, in other words, the nobles of Israel were the people who went up there with Moses. It says that God did not touch them. Also, they saw God, and they did eat and drink up there. Okay, and then go on over to, in the same chapter, into verse 15, and it says, "And Moses went up into the mount, and a cloud covered the mount. And the glory of the Lord abode upon Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it for 6 days. And the 7th day he called unto Moses out of the midst of the cloud. And the sight of the glory of the Lord was like devouring fire." Now you remember that's how God appeared first to Moses, was by the fire that did not burn up the bush. But this one was a devouring fire on the top of the mountain in the eyes of the children of Israel. All these Israelites, the Hebrews, were on a plain looking in clear sight at what was going on in this mountain. And Moses went up into the midst of the cloud and got himself up into the mount. And Moses was in the mount 40 days and 40 nights. Now we know that happened several times. You remember that the first time he came down and they were in sin, and Moses threw the tablets down. So he went back, and God gave him the 10 Commandments again. Now, before we go on, I want to tell you something I think is interesting. I think it was last week where we read where God came down on the mountain in a thick cloud, dark cloud with lightnings. Now, if you go over to Revelation and you see what John saw in heaven, you will find that around God's throne, on top of God's throne, all around God in heaven that John saw in the book of Revelation was dark, thick clouds of lightning. So we know that, I think there's so much that's been lost to us. Oh, I know there has. And one day we'll understand it, and when we understand it, we'll say, my goodness, how come we can put that together? But we do know that this is, not very many people have seen God like this. And of course it says you cannot see God and live. However, a few have. And so it was on Sinai, you remember, where he said, you can see my backside. I'll go and by you, but you cannot see my face. But I will let you see the back of me as I pass by. So this was really something. And this was God beginning to reveal himself to his people. He had called his people 400 years earlier in the time of Abraham, when he asked Abraham to leave his home and to go across the water and the land, and he was going to give him a home that his children would live in, and that is in the present day Israel today. We call it the Promised Land. So then you remember that Abraham was put into a deep sleep by God, and God told him, he said, I'm going to put your descendants, they're going to be slaves down in a foreign land for 430 years. And you might be interested in knowing that the day that Moses walked out with those people, they had been there to the day 430 years, exactly as God told Abraham. Okay, so let's talk about St. Catherine's for a little while. St. Catherine's was really something. I have done a lot of study and have many books about St. Catherine's. That's the monasteries that's at the base of Mount Sinai. And I think I'll just read you some about, from a book that I have here, Israel at Sinai. But the main thing, while we show the groups, the different pictures during this telecast, just know that these mountains that you're looking at, if this is indeed Mount Sinai, was the mountains Moses climbed. They were the mountains where God appeared and gave the 10 Commandments and his other laws. Okay, so to kind of bring you up to what's going on here, my book says the Israelites reached Mount Sinai in the 3rd month after their departure from Egypt, and they camped at its foot where they could view the summit. That's Exodus 19. God revealed himself to Moses, who then called on the people to make a covenant with God. That's also Exodus 19. When Israel agreed to keep God's word, they were given 3 days to prepare themselves before the beginning of the events which brought the 10 Commandments and the accompanying laws. The people later heard the law read and watched as Moses built an altar and sacrificed to the Lord. And that's all in 24, which is the Exodus 24, and that's what we just read from a while ago. A group composed of Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel were described as going up and seeing the God of Israel standing on a pavement of sapphire. Moses took Joshua into the mountain, and he stayed 40 days. Here he was shown the pattern of the tabernacle. This was, you remember that God told Moses how to build the tabernacle. He told him where to put the 10 Commandments. He told him how to build the box that was to house the 10 Commandments. He told him about making the Holy of Holies to come in, where to the different showbread was to go, where the candlestick was to go. God showed Moses all of that. And this was not that unfamiliar to Moses, because Moses came from Egypt, where they had Holy of Holies in their temples. And a lot of Christians don't know this, and a lot of Christians have problems with it. But you'll just have to have a problem with it, because it's a fact. And there was a reason that God let Moses be brought up in the palace under Pharaoh, because Moses was very handsome, the Bible says, and very smart. And he built a lot. He was in charge of building a lot of Egypt. Moses was. So one day we'll understand all this. But when God spoke to Moses and told him how to do this tabernacle, I think Moses was familiar with how they laid things out. Of course, they did not worship God in Egypt. Oh, there had been one Pharaoh that had worshiped God, Akhenaten, but they completely took all of his, once he died, they took all of his statues down and everything, because he was the only one that believed in one God. So, and I believe probably that one God was our God. Anyway, that's getting off the point here. It's another subject. When Moses returned from the mountain, the people had grown weary with his long absence and had fashioned a golden calf. And Moses had to persuade God not to kill them. Moses destroyed the golden calf and broke the tablets of the law. And Moses stood at the gate of the people and said, "Who is on the Lord's side? Come here to me." The Levites responded and were ordered to put to death the idolaters. That's in Exodus 32. The camp of Israel was hit with the plague. After telling Israel to prepare to leave Sinai and go to the Promised Land, and after instructing Moses to set up the tent of meeting, God gave Moses a second set of the stone tablets and revealed several other commands and warnings. After other instructions, which is found in Leviticus, the people prepared for the march, which is found in Numbers 1 through 10. A census was taken. Leaders were appointed in each tribe. The Levites were organized. Camp regulations were spelled out, including details about the order of marching, and the people left Sinai. Now, here we come to Mount Catherine. In the area around the traditional site of the giving of the law, there are 3 mountain towers over the plains. Now, I selected some pictures right here where you can clearly see these 3 mountains. Now, I took these pictures from the top of Mount Sinai, so you can see, if you were there this morning or tonight, exactly what it looks like. So Mount Catherine rises 8,536 feet above sea level on the southwest. Mount Moses, I think is the one we climb, rises 7,363 feet, and Rosh El Shashaf, 6,540 feet on the northwest. Several traditional sites have been chosen through the centuries, but none is certain. at 6,900 feet on Jebel Musa, which is Moses Mount, in the chapel of Elijah, and my group went right by that. We'll show you pictures of us climbing, and where we stood. I remember vividly that Linda Baker, I have a picture of her standing by this chapel of Elijah. I don't know that we have this one selected, but she was on this trip. It's with her daughter. It was a small group, and not all of us went. Some people did not even choose to climb the mountain, and some people did not make it to the top. But I was looking at those pictures this week, and just precious memories, just precious. Also on the side of this mountain is the spring, which is said to be the place where Moses tended Jethro's flocks. On the northwest slope of Mount Moses, Constantine's mother, Helena, built a small church in the 4th century. The monastery of St. Catherine's, covering about the size of a city block and resembling a fortress, was built on the site of Helena's church and can be traced back to the Emperor Justinian, AD 527. Now you remember that it was Constantine who had the vision. He was going into war. He was over Rome, and Rome had never been Christian. And he prayed for a sign about the battle he was going into, and history records that Constantine looked up and saw a cross in the sky, and that is when Rome became Christian. So Constantine himself could not go to the Holy Land, but he sent his mother Helena, and his mother is who discovered all of the sites that we have in Israel today. The tomb of Christ, it was Helena that found that, because she found statues on these sites that, not Titus, not Herod, I can't remember. Anyway, the enemy found these sites, and instead of erecting churches, they put their heathen statues up. So Helena that's how she found these sites that our Christian heritage and the Jewish heritage has. So it was Constantine's mother who built on this site. Now, the monastery library is said to be one of the oldest libraries in the world. It includes an invaluable list of ancient manuscripts in Greek, Syriac, Georgian, Slavic, and Arabic. Now then, I want to explain this to you before we leave, because this is very important. There were 2 books that are the oldest copies of the Bible in the world today. And one of them was found at St. Catherine's in the 19th century. These 2 books, the name of them is Codex, and Codex means book. Sinaiticus, so the book found at Sinai, you might say. And that book is in, it was discovered at St. Catherine's in the 19th century, and it is now in the British Museum in London. So often when I study my Bible, I come up with things like that, and I've been to the British Museum in London, and it is unbelievable. But I read, I didn't even know that copy was there. I could have seen it. I mean, the oldest copy of the Bible in the world. And then the other one, which is the Codex Book of Vaticanus, and it is today in Rome in the Vatican Library. So these are the 2 oldest copies of the Bible that we have. And if it had not been for St. Catherine's not being done, torn up in war, we wouldn't have that. They say that the library there at St. Catherine's has the most precious manuscripts in the world today, and no doubt they do. So this was the one that was found at the Vatican, not at the Vatican, at the Sinai, was a 3rd century Greek translation of the Bible. So it had been about 300 years after the life of Christ, and this was a Greek translation of the Bible. That's what was found there. That's what's at the British Museum today. It was transferred by Constantine von Tischendorf to the private libraries of the Tsars in the middle of the 19th century. It was later sold to the British Museum. The monastery was found to mark the spot where Moses saw the burning bush. It encloses the Church of St. Catherine, the Chapel of the Burning Bush, and many recent buildings, including a mosque. After the encampment of Sinai, Moses and the Israelites moved southeastward and traveled through the wilderness of Paran. It was to this area that Hagar and Ishmael had fled, if you remember that. So I've showed you pictures of who climbed to the top, and the sunrise there at Mount Sinai, and what a wonderful time we had. So thank you for joining us in my imaginary trip to the Sinai, and I hope to see you next week. Bye-bye.